The air on the deck of a British transport ship crackles with anticipation. It's 1944, and the vessel is sailing from Egypt to the shores of Italy, toward one of the bloodiest battlefields of the Second World War. On board are hundreds of soldiers of the Polish Second Corps, survivors of Siberian gulags, now a hardened fighting force. But among them is a figure that doesn't belong. The British officers stare in disbelief. They had cited every rule in the King's regulations. No animals. But the Polish soldiers were immovable. If their companion didn't go, they didn't go. And so, through a stroke of bureaucratic genius, this creature was not a pet. It was officially a soldier with its own rank, paybook, and serial number. How is this possible? And why would an army of orphans, on their way to face enemy fire, refuse to fight without it? To understand how a bear ends up in the army, you first have to understand the almost unbelievable story of the men who became his family. Their journey begins not with the bear, but in the frozen wastelands of the Soviet Union. In 1939, Poland was brutally crushed in a dual invasion by Nazi Germany from the west and the Soviet Union from the east. The country was annihilated, wiped from the map. As part of this conquest, the Soviets captured hundreds of thousands of Polish soldiers and civilians. They were not treated as prisoners of war, but as enemies of the state, and were shipped in cattle cars to the sprawling network of forced labor camps known as the gulags, many of them in the desolate wilderness of Siberia. For 2 long, nightmarish years, these Poles endured a living hell. They faced sub-zero temperatures, rampant disease, starvation, and grueling labor. Hope was a commodity more scarce than bread. But then, in June 1941, history took one of its sharpest and most unexpected turns. Hitler, in a stunning act of betrayal, invaded his former ally, the Soviet Union. Suddenly, Joseph Stalin was desperate for allies. He struck a deal with the Polish government in exile based in London, granting a one-time amnesty to the surviving Polish citizens in his camps. From the depths of Siberia, a ghost army began to emerge. Tens of thousands of emaciated men, women, and children, many of them orphaned by the war, were set free. Led by General Władysław Anders, a man who had himself been freed from the notorious Lubyanka prison in Moscow, these survivors embarked on a monumental trek. They traveled south, an exodus of skeletons walking out of the Arctic toward freedom. Their destination was Iran, where they would cross the Caspian Sea and come under British command. There, this collection of survivors would be reformed and re-equipped as a new fighting force, the Polish Second Corps. These were not just soldiers. They were men who had lost everything: their homes, their families, their country. More than 115,000 Poles, including over 40,000 civilians, made it out of the Soviet Union. They were fueled by a searing desire for revenge and the singular, desperate dream of one day seeing a free Poland again. It was on this grueling journey, in the spring of 1942, as their convoy snaked through the mountain roads of Iran, that they stumbled across a creature just as lost and alone as they were. In the mountains near the city of Hamadan, Iran, the Polish convoy came across a curious sight. A young, hungry-looking Iranian shepherd boy was holding something in a burlap sack, a tiny, whimpering Syrian brown bear cub. Its mother had been shot by hunters, and the cub was alone, malnourished, and terrified, a state of being the soldiers understood with painful intimacy. A young, 18-year-old civilian refugee named Irina Bukevich, who was traveling with the convoy, was immediately taken with the cub and urged the soldiers to help. Their hearts went out to the small animal. A lieutenant approached the boy and began to barter. For a few tins of canned beef, a chocolate bar, and a prized Swiss Army knife, the boy handed over the sack. The cub was so young and weak it had trouble swallowing. Irina, along with a soldier named Peter Prendes, who had become the bear's primary caregiver, stepped in as surrogate parents. They fed the tiny bear condensed milk, first from a makeshift teat and then from an empty vodka bottle, a detail that seemed to set the tone for his future life. Slowly, nurtured by the soldiers, the cub began to regain its strength. The men named him Wojtek. In Polish, it is a diminutive form of the Old Slavic name Wojtek, which carries a powerful meaning: he who enjoys war. or more poetically, the Joyful Warrior. It was a name that would prove to be prophetic. Initially, Wojtek was a secret mascot, passed into the care of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. But it's incredibly difficult to hide a growing bear for long. Soon, he wasn't a secret, but the pride of the entire unit. He was an orphan, adopted by an army of orphans. A small, furry symbol of life in a world that had shown them only death. He had found his family. Wojtek wasn't a pet. He was one of the soldiers. He grew up entirely surrounded by men of the 22nd Company and began to copy their behavior in the most astounding ways. He slept with them in their tents, cuddling with them for warmth on cold nights, or in his own custom-made wooden crate that traveled with them on the trucks. His diet quickly evolved beyond milk. He graduated to fruit, marmalade, and honey. But his two absolute favorites were gifts from his comrades, beer and cigarettes. He would happily chug straight from the bottle. He didn't smoke the cigarettes. Instead, he would take a puff or two before eating them. His antics became the stuff of legend as the company moved through Iraq, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. He figured out how to operate the camp showers and would often infuriate the quartermaster by using up all the water content to sit under the spray for ages. This habit led to one of his most famous exploits. One night in Palestine, a thief snuck into the camp's bathhouse, hoping to steal from the ammunition stores. He was not confronted by a human guard, but by Wojtek, who was enjoying a solitary shower. The terrified man surrendered immediately, and for his service as a guard, Wojtek was reportedly rewarded with 2 bottles of beer and unlimited shower time. He loved to play wrestle with the soldiers. As he grew into an adult, standing nearly 6 feet tall and weighing close to 500 pounds, these wrestling matches became a sight to behold. Yet, he was a gentle giant. He seemed to understand his immense strength, never using his claws, and always allowing his sparring partner to win by rolling onto his back in submission. He was taught to salute when greeted, and would march on his hind legs alongside the men. He would ride shotgun in the supply trucks, his head hanging out the window like a massive dog, stunning local onlookers and military police alike. But Wojtek was more than just comic relief. For these men, haunted by what they had lost and the horrors they had witnessed, this playful, beer-drinking bear was a profound source of comfort. He wasn't just a mascot anymore. He was a brother. By 1944, the Polish Second Corps had moved through the Middle East and was preparing for its ultimate destination, the front lines of the war in Italy. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company arrived at the port of Alexandria, Egypt, ready to board a British transport ship that would take them into the heart of the European conflict. But they immediately hit a major snag. The British High Command had a strict, non-negotiable rule. No pets or animals were allowed on their military vessels. The British port officer was firm. The soldiers could board, but the bear had to stay behind. For the men of the 22nd Company, leaving Wojtek behind was unthinkable. He wasn't just a pet they had picked up along the way. He was family. He was a comrade who had been with them for 2 years, across thousands of miles and 3 continents. He had come from the same place of loss as they had. The soldiers refused to back down. They issued an ultimatum. If Wojtek wasn't allowed on the ship, then none of them would board either. The Poles provided a work of pure genius. If the regulations stipulated that no animals were permitted, they would simply have to make him something else. They would make him a soldier. With some hastily drawn-up paperwork, Wojtek was officially enlisted into the Polish army. He was given the rank of private, assigned a serial number, and issued his own official army paybook. He was now Private Wojtek of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. His caretakers were formally assigned. The stunned British officer, holding official enlistment documents for a Syrian brown bear, had no further grounds to refuse. Private Wojtek walked up the gangplank with his fellow soldiers, a legal, card-carrying member of the Allied forces, heading into a combat zone. The campaign in Italy was one of the most savage and grueling of the entire war. The key to breaking the formidable German defensive line was Monte Cassino, an ancient mountaintop monastery that had been turned into a seemingly impenetrable fortress. For months, Allied forces had thrown themselves at its slopes, suffering horrific casualties with nothing to show for it. In May 1944, the near-suicidal mission of taking the fortress fell to the Polish Second Corps. The fighting was relentless, a brutal slog up treacherous mountain paths under constant enemy artillery and mortar fire. The job of the 22nd Company was to keep the guns firing by hauling a constant, back-breaking stream of supplies, including 100-pound crates of artillery shells, up to the forward positions. The men worked around the clock in this hellscape. It was here, amidst the chaos and carnage, that Wojtek had his finest hour. Watching his human friend struggle under the immense weight of the crates, Wojtek apparently decided to join in. He would approach the supply trucks, stand on his hind legs, and hold out his paws. The soldiers would load a heavy crate of shells into his arms, and Wojtek would carry it up to the artillery positions, set it down without ever dropping one, and return for another. Accounts from veterans vary slightly on the specifics. Some swear they saw him carrying full 100-pound crates of live ammunition directly to the guns. Others suggest he more often helped by carrying empty shell casings or other heavy materials away from the line. But one fact is undisputed by everyone who was there. In the hellish noise and fury of Monte Cassino, a bear was calmly and consistently carrying vital supplies for the Allied war effort. The constant explosions didn't seem to faze him. The sight of this incredible animal working tirelessly alongside them was an immeasurable boost to the morale of the exhausted soldiers. On May 18, 1944, after days of brutal fighting, the Polish flag was finally raised over the smoking ruins of the monastery. The German line was broken, and Wojtek had played his part. In recognition of his bravery and service during the Battle of Monte Cassino, the Polish High Command officially promoted him. He was now Corporal Wojtek. His legend was sealed. To honor him, the 22nd Company adopted a new, official emblem, a silhouette of a bear carrying an artillery shell, a badge they proudly wore on their uniforms and painted on their vehicles. When the war in Europe finally ended, the soldiers of the Polish Second Corps faced a bitter and crushing reality. Poland, the country they had fought so desperately to free, had been handed over to Soviet control at the Yalta Conference. For most of these men, who had escaped the gulags, returning home to a communist regime was not an option. They were heroes without a home. They couldn't take Wojtek back to Poland either, fearing he would be used as a propaganda piece or end up in a circus. So, on October 26, 1946, Wojtek and many of his comrades were transported to a resettlement camp at Winfield Airfield in Berwickshire, Scotland. He became a local celebrity, attending village dances with the soldiers and giving rides to local children. As the soldiers were slowly demobilized and began to build new lives for themselves, they knew they could not provide the long-term care that a 500-pound bear required. With heavy hearts, on November 15, 1947, they made the difficult decision to entrust him to the Edinburgh Zoo. Wojtek became a star attraction, but he never forgot his former life. Veterans from the 22nd Company would visit him for years, often calling out to him in Polish. He would become visibly excited, perking up at the sound of the language he grew up with. They'd toss him cigarettes, which he would promptly eat, just as he had during the war. On more than one occasion, a former comrade would even jump over the enclosure wall to wrestle with him one last time, to the absolute horror of the zookeepers but the clear delight of the bear. Wojtek lived out the rest of his days at the Edinburgh Zoo, passing away on December 2nd, 1963. He was about 21 years old. Today, Wojtek is a national hero in both Poland and Scotland. Every child in Poland learns the story of the bear who went to war, a beloved symbol of their country's unbreakable spirit. Statues of him stand proudly in Edinburgh's Princes Street Gardens, in London, in Poland, and around the world, ensuring his memory is never forgotten. One of his fellow soldiers once said that Wojtek helped win the Second World War. In a strictly military sense, that might be an exaggeration, but in a much deeper, more human sense, it's absolutely true. In an era of unimaginable cruelty and loss, Wojtek provided laughter, loyalty, and unconditional love. He was more than a mascot and more than a soldier. He was the joyful warrior who fought not with teeth and claws, but with the unwavering spirit of a true comrade. He was a 500-pound beer-drinking symbol of hope and a brother to men who had lost everything else. Wojtek's story is a powerful reminder that family can be found in the most unlikely of circumstances and that hope can endure even in the darkest of times. If you've been moved by his incredible journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales from history. And let us know in the comments, what part of Wojtek's story amazed you the most?